right. We're hoping we're live. We're hoping we have sound this time. So hopefully somebody can let us know. We've had an issue with that, but we want to take a moment, if you can hear us, and welcome you to The Gospel Truth. We're going to be talking about things related to prophecy tonight, I'm sure. That's kind of what goes on. So we have been trying to talk about the Olivet Discourse, and we got up to the point where Jesus said it would be just like in the days of Noah. So that is a little bit of a preview of where we're going to start. Where we end up, who knows? So we're gonna find out about that. But a few of the things we do want to cover quickly is the simple fact that we want you to come and be with us and worship with us and learn with us at the West Side Church of Christ. We're in Indianapolis, Indiana, of course. Our address is that's our zip code. Tell you what kind of night this is going to be. What is our address? 2675 Kentucky Avenue. And the zip code is 46221 in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we would certainly love to have you come and be with us. Our whole intent is to just simply study and to learn and to grow in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And we simply believe in His words. That's what we are here for tonight. That's why we are here, because we believe in the very words of Jesus. I mean, am I understating that, or?
No, that's a perfect statement, true statement.
Yeah. So that's the whole purpose of all of this. And you know, we have had, before I jump into this, also, you can watch on YouTube as well. That the channel on YouTube is Restoration Movement 2.0, and our website at the church, or for our congregation, is westsidecoc.org. So check that out. And having said that, let's just go ahead and jump right into this. We've had lots and lots of comments this past week. We put out a couple videos that we had taped. They were live videos of sermons on Sunday evening, and we're going to try to do that again. This will be our third one this week. They started out with, we started these with the topic of why I believe the Lord returned in 70 A.D. The first one was because Jesus said so. The second one was because the apostles said so. And you'll have to tune in Sunday to see what the third one is. I'm not going to give it away yet. So, but you can probably guess where it's going. So, but anyway, that's created a firestorm of comments. And then a couple of our members on top of that posted comments about some things related to eschatology and the coming of the Lord, and created another firestorm. So we've had an awful lot of activity this week going on. But we want you to check those things out. We want the questions. But, you know, there's kind of a problem with this, Trent. Questions are great. But what is the deal with, how do you put this? How would you put it? I mean, these negative comments. I understand people disagreeing. That's one thing. But being kind of not nice about it, you see where I'm going with that? What do you get from that?
Yeah, and people are really passionate about what they believe. You know, I've always heard everybody always hears this. You never discuss politics or religion, and that's because politics has become a religion, and religion has become political. And people, it's like telling someone that the person they voted for is corrupt or a crook. You know, they're going to immediately going to defend what they believe, not necessarily the person. They're going to defend themselves for voting for that person. So I think that's what's happening on the on Facebook. A lot of passionate people about what they believe. Some of it is quite a bit of it seems to mostly come from futurists. They're pretty condemning, accusatory. They offer one or two verses, and if they even attempt to explain it, they explain it out of context.
Yeah. And
then when you point out the true context, then they become even more angry, and eventually their friends jump in, and then they're gone. Or you ask them a question, and they go back to, the only thing I can think of is they go back to look at the scripture and they see that they're wrong, so they disappear.
Okay, here's a perfect example. Let's go back to this. Edward Pratt. So let's just call you out. Okay, he says we're more mixed up than Bahamian conch salad. And then he says,
wow,
that we're
is that any good? I've never had it.
It kind of sounds good, really, but I don't know. I never had it. But then he says, you're teaching false doctrine. Please stop misleading people. Okay,
see, that's the example right there. Immediately.
Edward, you just convinced me. I mean, your argument was so powerful that now I have to change back to believing my error that I came out of. Not. You look at it like this. I appreciate the comments, and I really do, and I welcome them. And we've had to deal with lots of people that that call themselves Christians, but they don't really act like it. Right. So, but we're not going to go that route. The scriptures teach, as a matter of fact, 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9 says this: not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. So, we're not going to just exchange insult for insult. We're passionate about what we believe. We know that it's the truth. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that distinguishes someone who has a good and an honest and a true heart from someone who is just trying to, I don't know, play some kind of game or something. And it's that I'm willing to change. If you can show me that I'm wrong, I promise you I will change. I have done it. I have a history of it. And I'll admit when I'm wrong. And this brother here has that good heart, and the brethren at our congregation are that way. As a matter of fact, here's what we've actually done, Edward and anyone else who might care to know. We have actually put out an invitation to local preachers, asking them to come into our congregation and preach to us and tell us where we're wrong. The only stipulation is that we have a moment after the sermon to ask them questions. Why is that such a big deal? And nobody's taking us up on that.
Yeah, so so why don't we offer it to anyone then?
Yeah,
I mean, if we have people who are attacking us for what we're teaching, then why don't we just open it up to them?
Yeah,
why don't they come and tell us? Why do they have to?
We'll set it up. We'll put it on a Saturday afternoon. We'll make it nice and easy. We're not going to interrupt anybody's service, not ours, not yours. But here's the way I view this. Tell me if you think I'm way off base on this, Trent. I'm a gospel preacher. If someone came to me and said, you can come into our congregation and you can tell us where we're wrong, you guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to hesitate. I'm there. I'm going. But for some reason, that's not the MO of so many of our brethren, and that's sad. Shouldn't be that way.
People hide behind a computer.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of keyboard courage going on out there. Okay, so we don't have to dwell on that a whole lot. Let's talk about something that's pretty cool. The end of the world. It's really not.
I've never seen it in the Bible.
Really not the end of the world, is it? The interesting thing about it is we'll just have to live with the error message. Hopefully, if you're on YouTube, you're still getting this feed. My computer is having an issue, but I think we'll be okay. If not, switch over to Facebook at John Watson Live. Matter of fact, before we go any further, right now, share this with a whole bunch of people, all that you can, and go in and see those two sermons from this Sunday night and last Sunday night. Share them with everybody that you can. Okay, so do you realize that there is not one single passage? Let's just use the Old Testament. Let's go to the Old Testament and try to find one single passage that talks about the world coming to an end, or the destruction of the world. You want to know something? There are none. Matter of fact, there are not even any in the New Testament. It is pretty well understood that the Jews, this was not a concept that they labored with. Now, I'm not saying it never came up, but they knew that this was not an issue, that the world wasn't going to come to an end. Now, our brethren today, and not only our brethren, but just about everybody, matter of fact, I don't think that there's a denomination out there that I can think of that is, how do you put this? is any different. They all, Church of Christ included, believe almost exactly the same thing when it comes to eschatology, that the Lord's coming back in the future. The only difference is that they put time, they have timing a little off with the millennial reign and maybe a
timing off now. They've
got
so far away 2,000 years.
Right. Well, some will put the millennial reign, you know, they're pre, or some are post, or some are a, or depending on how you put it, where there's no millennial reign. That's it. Otherwise, it's all pretty much exactly the same, and they may quabble over you know, this detail or that, and a sign here and a sign there, or no signs. But basically, it's all the same. Now, what we're teaching is first century truth. This is what the brethren in the first century believed. And let's kind of jump into this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about. We've been trying to do this for 3 weeks now, so we'll see what we can get here. Matthew chapter 24 in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus said that when he returns, he comes back, or he is coming. Notice what he says here. He says it will be. This is Matthew 24 and verse 36. We'll start at verse 36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Now, we did kind of talk about this, not in a whole great big lot of detail, I think remember.
We spent enough time on it.
But I think we did it justice. So you might want to go back and, just like Peter said, in 2 Peter 3, the first 2 verses, instead of having to go back and explain it all, guess what he did? He said, remember what has already been taught to you, in that case, by Jesus, the apostles, and the prophets. So we're asking you to go back and remember what we taught on this a little bit. And you can go back 2 or 3 or 4 episodes and look at that. But verse 37 says, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. What do you get out of that? Just like the days of Noah.
Well, if you don't know what the days of Noah are, then you can go back to the Old Testament.
Wait a minute. You're suggesting that we go back and read and talk about and look at the Old Testament? I thought Colossians 2:14 says the Old Testament was nailed to the cross and now we don't need it.
Well, contrary to popular belief in the church, the Old Testament is very necessary for our understanding.
Amen. It is. Romans 15, verse 14, something like that. It's a schoolmaster to us. Jesus said in John chapter 5, 44 to 47, as I recall, he said, if you would have read Moses and understood Moses, then you would understand what I'm saying. And he says, if you don't know Moses, then how can you understand what I'm saying? So that whole concept of taking the old law, putting it in a box, and saying, well, we don't need that, it's just, it's harmful.
Yeah.
You will never be able to understand the concepts in the New Testament if you can't understand where they came from, which is the Old Testament. So essentially, the New Testament is the Old Testament fulfilled, essentially. So that's how we look at this. Now, so we're reading here, this again is Matthew 24 and verse 37. So the Son of Man the coming of the Son of Man, I'll get this straight, will be just like in the days of Noah. So let's read on here and get the full context. So, for as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be.
Okay, so a few questions come to mind here. So when Christ is speaking with his disciples about this, he says, maybe to quote again, in verse 38 from the King James, it was good enough for the apostles, it was good enough for us. So we'll use King James. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came. And they knew not until the flood came, basically, and took them all away. So also shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So who are the they in Noah's time?
It was everybody else.
It was everybody but Noah's family.
Yeah.
And so when you hear people in the church today saying, no one knows, the hour is going to come as a thief in the night. Well, who is he going to come? And back then, who's he going to come as a thief in the night to? Was it to the apostles, the disciples, to the Christians? Or was he going to come to as a thief in the night to those who rejected him? So let's go back to Noah.
Yeah, we got to do that. Okay, so if we're going to look at this New Testament passage, and Jesus is referring to an Old Testament passage, doesn't it just make sense to go back and read the Old Testament
Makes
passage?
sense. It's the only right thing to do.
Right.
In order to understand, you can't create your own scenario of Noah, and that's what the church has done.
That's right. Well, we need to answer this at some point. What has AD 70 got to do with my salvation?
Oh yeah, these endless questions like that.
Well, I think before we exegete this verse we've been talking about, I think I can answer this real quick. Tell me if I do this good enough. Jesus said, Mark 8, verse 38. This is in regards to this question that was just asked. What does AD 70 got to do with my salvation? Okay, here's what it has to do with your salvation. Jesus said, if you are ashamed of me and my words, this is Mark 8, verse 38, in this generation, then I'll be ashamed of you when I come in judgment with my angels and that kind of thing. I'm just kind of paraphrasing there a little bit. Okay, so that's what he said. Now, here's the question. Are you ashamed of the words of Jesus? I'm not. He said what he said, and I'm defending those words. Now, let's think about this. Jesus promised. I wish I had that quote from C.S. Lewis. You probably remember it better than I do. But
not verbatim.
Jesus promised he was coming back in their lifetime. He taught that. His apostles taught that. And the brethren believed it. Now, all you have to do is read through the first century, or through the New Testament. You'll see that that's what they believed in the first century. So, even commentators and lots of scholars admit that they believed that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime, but they were wrong. That just blows me away. So they were wrong. They were wrong being guided by the Holy Spirit. They misunderstood it. The apostles taught it incorrectly. No, that doesn't fly. The Word of God is infallible. Paul said, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. Now think about this. If Jesus lied and what he said was not true, and it didn't come true when he said it was going to come true, then how do you know you can be saved? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. And I'll even go there, try to make it even a bit more simple. Go to Hebrews 9. Let's go to Hebrews 9. 9:26. We'll start from there. So Hebrews 9:26. For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now once in the end of the world, which is actually age, he hath appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Mm-hmm. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many. And unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. He appeared in 70 AD apart from sin for salvation. So our salvation was complete in 70 AD. That's how important AD 70 is.
Amen.
Now, what's happened is...
State that verse again real quick.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Catch you off guard there.
So, verse 28, Hebrews 9:28. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many. And unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. He appeared the first time to be our sin. The second time was for salvation. If he has not appeared, then we are not saved. People, don't you understand that? If he hasn't appeared, we're not saved. Now, the 70 AD thing, this term it's a man-made term brought up by the leadership in the churches because they couldn't answer these questions. So, like everything else they do, they have to fix a name to it so that they can lambaste it and cause division. So it's by the wicked men who've said this AD 70 doctrine. I don't see the word AD 70 written anywhere in that Bible. But I do see the times that it was written for. And then you look at the historical context, and it happened between 66 and 73 AD. Over that period of time is when all this stuff took place. It's modern man who has hijacked the gospel, have created this AD 70 doctrine name.
Well, let's point something else out here from Hebrews, the ninth chapter.
Uh-huh.
I'm looking for this. It says that as long as the temple stood, Hebrews 9 verse 8, I think it is, the Holy Spirit is signifying this, that the way into the holy place has not yet been disclosed while the outer tabernacle is still standing. Now the outer tabernacle, and again that's Hebrews 9 verse 8, the outer tabernacle was the temple.
The temple in Jerusalem.
The physical building. And that's exactly right. And all you have to do is read through the rest of the 9th chapter of Hebrews, and Paul makes that, well, whoever's writing Hebrews makes that point very clear, that these things are a copy of what was in heaven. Now he says heaven cannot be opened until the tabernacle, or as long as the tabernacle is still standing.
There's no access to God.
Right. So once that tabernacle was destroyed, guess what? Heaven was open. Revelation chapter 21, pretty clear. And all we have to do is see that.
Yeah, and that's basically, that is a fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles.
Oh, yeah.
God took that earthly tabernacle away because it separated us from him. And now he tabernacles with us spiritually.
Yeah.
See, that's another problem that the church has. The church is always looking for this physical thing, but we sit and we condemn other forms of Christianity for their belief because they're always talking about physical, but we're as guilty as they are.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're not anymore.
Well, I mean, as a whole.
Yeah.
Generally as a whole.
Right, get it.
But this AD 70 doctrine name is it's a name created by men to hijack the gospel.
You see
of
what
Christ.
This? Amen. You see what this is? It's not the AD 70 doctrine. This is the doctrine.
It's the gospel
that they believed in the first century. This is first century Christianity, and it's nothing different than what was taught 2,000 years ago. That's just pretty simple. Lots of comments here. I don't even know if we can.
Well, yeah, we need to
keep up with this.
Yeah, you can't address every one of these questions.
Okay, well, let's go.
We're going to finish this.
Let's go back to Genesis because the topic was Jesus said the coming of the Son of Man will be just like in the days of Noah. That's Matthew 24 verse 36 and 37. So what does that mean? Just like in the days of Noah. Well, let's go back and look at the days of Noah and see what happened. Because Jesus said, just as they were entering, as Noah entered the ark, they were marrying, giving in marriage. Everything was going along just the same way that it always had, right? So let
me point out something here too. The proponents of who really go on the attack on Facebook and other forms of media communication, they say that the Bible was written to us for us today. It didn't really apply to the first century. So, and then some will say that it's perpetual, that it continues on and on and on. Well, if that's the case, then the Lord would never ever come, because that generation would always be looking forward for him to come, but the next generation would have to come before that.
Yeah, good
so
point.
it's like tomorrow never comes.
Yeah,
okay, so if everything in this Bible was written for us today, then we need to go back to Genesis 6 verse 14, when God instructed Noah. He said, make thee an ark and go for wood. I don't see anybody building an ark except for the one that was built down in Kentucky.
I don't even think they use gopher wood.
Yeah, people don't even know what gopher wood is.
Right.
And then it gives the dimensions of it. There's only one person I knew who built an ark, and it cost billions of dollars to build, didn't it?
Right.
Right. Are we building an ark? Are we making an Ebenezer in a memorial of things going on that the Jewish people did? I mean, people, you have to really. Here's a difficult. You have to discern what is for us today and what was historical in the past. That's the critical part of it.
Yeah, there's a passage in, if I remember this right, Jeremiah 3. I'd have to go and look. But either way, it says that, I believe it says that Rahab is with us to this day.
To this day, yes.
So wait a minute. If we believe that everything in the Bible is written to us today, then Rahab's still around, or whoever that was talking about.
Is Paul still waiting on to see Timothy? You know, come on. I mean,
Okay, so back to this idea of the flood and Noah, and how this was just like in Noah's day, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Now let's notice this. Everyone says, well, Jesus said that nobody's going to know, no man knows the day, and now we addressed that, and we said that you need to go back and look at Zechariah chapter 13, I think 12, it is. 13. Maybe it's 12:10. Either way. And this is exactly what the Lord was talking about. Okay? Now, on to this point. So what about Noah? So with Noah, how is this working? So he says here, you skip over to Genesis chapter 7. He says, verse 4, for after 7 more days I will send rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. And Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Now, notice this. He says in verse 7, then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Okay, so the Lord said in 7 days it's going to rain, it's going to flood. Now, how does that square with what Jesus said? You see, Jesus was not saying, and it is impossible to prove this point, at least to any good and honest heart that wants to see the truth. Jesus was not saying that nobody knows when it's going to happen. Jesus was saying we know the general time. We don't know the specific time. And as a matter of fact, only Jesus, or rather Yahweh or Jehovah or God, only he knew at that point the very specific time. But at some point, I don't know how far I want to go in with this. I think Jesus did know. By the time you read...
Well, certainly he did, because Revelation 1:1 says that he did know.
He did know. Absolutely right. So, and he signified these things for what? For his servants to know. So they were being warned. This is getting ready to happen.
God gave it to Jesus, to give it to his angel, to give to John for his servants in the church.
Yes.
That's basically what Revelation 1:1 says. So as God revealed it to Noah, he revealed it to Christ. It's exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. Noah was the preacher. Christ is the minister or the priest. Okay, right. So when you start thinking, really dissecting and going back, you know, the New Testament is just really the fulfillment of the Old Testament.
That's exactly.
You said that earlier.
Well, you can say it again.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead and say it again.
No,
in case somebody missed it.
Yeah, the New Testament, the New Covenant is the fulfillment of the Old Covenant.
That's right. Yeah, and we have missed that. Somewhere along the line, some of our scholars told us that Colossians 2:14 teaches us that you don't have to study the Old Testament anymore.
Well,
we got the message that way. I don't know.
It doesn't say that. It's just that man has put that in there. Man has added it. Has taken that to the extreme,
right?
As we are more prone to do anyway.
And we need this. Otherwise, we can't understand. We cannot fully understand it. Don't get me wrong. If you never read a stitch of the Old Testament, you could still understand the plan of salvation. But you're not going to understand sin. Paul said that he needed that old law to teach him about sin in Romans 7. You're not going to understand why sin came around. You're not going to understand a host of things. And all of these illustrations, Trent made a comment about the 7 feasts of Yahweh. You really need to study those things, because it was these Jewish feasts, but what were they for? What did they symbolize? You know, where's that at? Leviticus 23. The Lord said, and he wanted the children of Israel to understand that these were holy convocations. You know what a convocation is? You remember what a convocation is?
It's a gathering of an assembly.
Yeah, and it's where everybody comes together to rehearse something. Now, why do you rehearse? Because there's going to come this day when it's how do you put this in stage terms? And
well, no, what's like this? Like, you remember in school, you'd have these convocations on a Friday for the football game that was going to be played that night. Yeah. It was a big cheer thing and a big pep rally.
Like a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, it's a dress rehearsal for when the game started. You know, you go in there and you show your support. So this is what it was.
Okay, let's see if we can recap these real quick. We don't have to go back here and look at these, but okay. So the first feast was
Passover.
Okay.
Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Right. Okay. So what did Passover represent? Well, them being set free from bondage and captivity. Okay. The second feast, Maybe I do need to go over here and look at these. Remember what it was?
Well, some of these are together, like Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Right.
And then you had a Feast of First Fruits, Pentecost.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so all of these feasts essentially represent everything. Now Jesus was
everything that is the redemptive work of Christ
and
God.
There you go.
Is what it is. So John, I kind of disagree with you that I think that you can't really understand what salvation is unless you understand the Old Testament. So I think it's very critical. God is much more wiser than we are. He gave us both testaments so that we could fully understand what sin was, how it separates us from God, and then the redemptive work of Christ in the New Testament that brings us in fellowship with God again.
Well, I agree with you disagreeing with me. I should have stated that much more clearly.
I think I knew what you meant, but yeah.
Okay, so essentially you have, we'll just cap this off real fast. These first 4 feasts
springtime
are the spring feasts, and they have to deal with the first coming of Jesus. The second set, these 3 feasts in the fall or at harvest time, deal with the return of the Lord, or his second coming.
His completion for salvation.
Right. And they're all within that season. So there's no gap theory here. We're not waiting an indeterminate amount of time. These were all to happen in that lifetime, which is why Jesus said these things are going to happen in the lifetime of some of those standing here, which takes us back to Matthew chapter 24. Okay, so we illustrated that Noah knew when the flood was going to come. He just didn't know that very moment. So there they are in the ark for 7 days, essentially. They're waiting around for 7 days. Did they know the precise moment? No, but they did know the time when it was going to happen.
Yeah. Had they not heeded God's warning, they would have perished in the flood also.
That's right.
Simple. Just as the Christians in the first century, if they did not heed these warnings that Christ was giving them in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and in Luke 17 as a side note, and in book of Revelation, these people were going to fall prey to this, and they were going to be a victim of it.
This comment here, I'm going to make a brief comment about this. Where did it go? He says, Stephen George Hetherington says, I've never heard a member of the church say everything in the Bible was written to us. I have. I have.
Look at our posts and start reading those posts.
Yeah. And let me ask you, my friend, was Jesus talking to you when he said these things are going to happen in your generation? Who was he talking to? It's either you or them. Which one is it? Now, what about the Apostle Paul in 1 and 2 Thessalonians? Who was he talking to?
Well, this is how they get around this generation thing. And I answered this on a post the other day. It says, verily, I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Well, the person who wrote this to refute it said, it means that the generation that sees that's when it's going to, and so in the whole wide world of twisting scriptures to meet your ideology, where does it say that the generation that sees this? It says this generation. It denotes that generation that Christ was speaking in, or speaking to, which is the first century Christians under the Mosaic law. They were still under the Mosaic law, especially in Matthew 24. Christ came. He was born in the Old Testament, lived during the Old Testament, died under the Old Testament, resurrected under the Old Testament.
Exactly right. So did they know? Did they have an idea when these events were going to take place? Jesus plainly said it. How much plainer does this have to get? Let's can I skip ahead?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Turn one page.
Hey, this is yours, man.
Well, in my Bible, it's 2 pages. Matthew 26.
Yeah, mine too. I hate like that.
I had a feeling it would be. Okay, so Matthew 26. I want to illustrate what Trent was just saying. Matthew chapter 26, verse 64. This is where Jesus is before Caiaphas and the high council. So you can't say that this is just Caiaphas.
Caiaphas, right?
Okay, this is the
that's the argument too.
That's right. It's the Sanhedrin. Now, in case you want me to show you this, look at verse 57.
It's a whole assembly of Pharisees, Sadducees, and other even Jewish people were there.
That's exactly
Jewish
right.
Citizens.
So those who seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were gathered together. Verse 59. And the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus. So they were all there. So this would be like addressing the the Supreme Court.
I got a good point to make here when you get done. Go ahead.
Okay, this would be like addressing the Supreme Court. You're going to talk to one justice, the Chief Justice. Are you addressing the whole court? You better believe it. Okay, so notice what he says here. Jesus said in verse 64, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Now, notice what happened. The high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed." Now, why did he blaspheme? You ever thought about this?
Yeah, because he made himself. Yeah, I thought about it because Christ made himself.
I figured you had.
Yeah, he made himself equal with God when he said that.
Exactly. How did he make himself equal with God? He wasn't saying, "I'm going to be walking on the clouds." They would have laughed him to scorn if that's all it was about.
They understood what a cloud coming was.
That's exactly right. They understood that. Matter of fact, I got a few notes here from this. I want you to. I'm going to say these. I'm not going to go look at them. But the Lord came on clouds. All right. Yahweh came on clouds. And Jesus in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 64 says, "I'm going to come back on clouds." So this high priest knew exactly what that meant. So here's these verses. Isaiah 13, 10 to 13. Isaiah 34 and verse 4. Ezekiel 32, 7 to 8. Joel 3, 15 to 16. Amos 8 and verse 9. Just for starters, there's plenty more. Look those up. This is where Yahweh, where Jehovah, where God came, and Jesus says, "I'm going to come in this glory of my Father the same way on the clouds." The angels, by the way, said that in Acts chapter 1, 9 through 11. They said, "Why do you stand there gazing up into heaven? He's going to come back the same way he left." How did he leave? The cloud received him out of their sight. He was in the cloud just like Yahweh in the Old Testament. And whenever Yahweh came in the clouds, did you see him? Nope. He was obscured by the clouds. The same thing happened to his son.
Same thing like when the high priest would go in to make an atonement in the temple. God would come down and fill the temple perfect for smoke, with smoke or whatever it was, so that he could not be seen by the Jewish people, by Jerusalem.
They called it a thick cloud.
Yeah, so when the priest went up into the temple to offer up the sacrifice for the atonement, he would disappear in this cloud. And then he would come back out of that cloud, and he would pronounce whether or not God accepted their sacrifice. Okay, so I mean, everything that Christ did is every bit of the seven feasts. Now, one thing I wanted to tell you about.
Okay, yeah, I want to see it.
In Matthew 26, verse 64, that you just cited here, which says, "Thou hast said, nevertheless, I say unto you." Okay, this is the hypocrisy in the church today. They'll sit there and say, "See, he was talking, he said you. He said you." He's talking to Caiaphas. But then they turn and say, in verse 34 of Matthew 24, "Verily I say unto you," is talking to us today. This generation is another generation. See how the hypocrisy in the church is rampant in its teaching on eschatology.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest problem is we have not been taught how to study. You know, okay, I'm going to admit, maybe I should not have said members of the Church of Christ don't study. I think that they believe that they do. And I thought I was studying, and this is where that comes from. I thought I was studying. I thought I really did. And it wasn't until I actually started studying and actually started seeing things that I realized I really wasn't studying. I was more or less trying to plug in what I had already been told so that I could make it make sense when I tell it to somebody else. Now,
John, let me ask you something.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have all the answers?
No.
Do you know everything in the Bible?
No. Not even close. Not even close.
Neither do I. I'm studying to learn, and I'm learning as I'm studying. I'm not an expert on this stuff. There are many men. I can name you probably 10, 15 men. Steve Baisden, Hober Neubauer, Brent Bishel, John Noe, Tony Denton, many other guys that are so much more ahead of me that they make me look silly.
Yeah.
Don Preston, William Bell,
Rooster. You got to put Rooster in there.
Oh yeah, amazing guy. I mean, they make me look like a first grader trying to go to college.
Okay, just to let you know, get on Facebook, look up this guy named Kenneth Rooster Morgan. He is going to blow you away. Send him a message. He is a walking Bible.
He is a walking Bible.
It's amazing. I love it.
Bible.
Yeah.
So Holger Neubauer's and Basin.
Oh, no question.
So is Don Preston.
Yeah. No question about it. Okay. So so back to Matthew 24.
Okay.
Alrighty. Let's look at the follow-up to the days of Noah. Okay, this is verse, where did I leave off? 40, 39?
30.
38. 38.
No, we finished the 38 and 39.
Okay, so they were giving in marriage and so forth, and they looked on them. Okay, now notice what it says in verse 40. There will be two in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. Okay, so I can understand why my brethren would look at this verse and say, well, this must be the end of the world when the Lord comes back and raptures everybody up. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a member of the Church of Christ, you believe in rapture. You have to. Your rapture is only a few seconds. Okay? It's this one-time event that lasts for just a few seconds just before the earth is destroyed. Now, the denominational beliefs about rapture are that this rapture happens before the premillennial reign. Well, so maybe it's after the premillennial reign, or I don't know, just depends on where they want to place this. But they do all have a rapture. Now, this is not talking about a rapture. What is he talking about? Okay. You want to give it a stab at this? I wind up talking a lot.
No, go ahead. I'm enjoying it.
Okay.
If I see anything that I can add to it, I'll jump in.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it.
I mean, you're doing such a great job. Why stop? I mean, seriously.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens. Okay. One taken, one left. Okay. Let's go back to the Babylonian captivity in Daniel. Now, who was taken and who was left? Think about this. Daniel was taken, but some were left. Who were the ones who were in the better sense of the word or phrase? Neither one really, because this was this situation happening. Essentially, what this is this Hebrew idiom, and this refers to people being in captivity and war and that kind of thing. And this conquering army would come in, and they would take some and they would leave some. And that's what he's talking about. He's saying that when this happens, some are taken and some are left. Now, think about this. When it came to Noah, who was taken and who was left? How would you answer that? Because I know you got a good answer for this.
Yeah, the evil are always taken. Noah was left. He was found to be the most righteous in that generation of people, and he stayed on the earth to replenish the earth. But the evil were taken.
Exactly. Man, that is perfect.
They were taken by death.
Matter of fact, doesn't it say in the narrative there that they were taken away?
Yes, it does.
I don't know.
Chapter 7, I believe.
Yeah.
Or beginning of chapter 8.
Yeah, something like that. Well, maybe we'll find this here.
And the water prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, in 15 cubits, and all the flesh that died moved upon the earth, or all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, both the fowl and every living substance. And
yeah, we may have to.
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah, we may have to just. But seems like that. I remember reading that somewhere. But the point is being made here in Matthew 24, and that's what Jesus was talking about. These were taken away. These evil men were taken away, and these righteous were left. Left where? I mean, it's just the opposite of what most would think. Now, let's continue thinking about this.
Yeah. Closest thing I can find just like this is Genesis 7:23. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things and the fowl of the heaven, anything that really basically breathed through their nostrils.
Yeah.
And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark.
Okay. So, anyway, it goes along to make our point here. So he's associating all this with Noah, just like in the days of Noah, and keep that in mind. But look at verse 42. Verse 42 is not a transition verse. It's a there were no verses actually when this was written. No divisions. And he says in verse 42, Matthew 24:42, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. All right? So who didn't know which day the Lord was coming? Noah or the people outside of the ark? Which ones didn't know? Well, he had told you which ones did know and which ones didn't. All you had to do is go back and read. If you weren't sure, Noah and his family knew, and the others didn't. Right? This. Verse 43, but be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would not have allowed his house to be broken into. For this reason, you also must be ready. For the Son of Man is, you do not think he will. So, how do we reconcile this here? What about this coming at a time, like a thief and so on and so forth? There really is a lot here to consider. How far do we want to go with this, you reckon?
Well, I think we kind of beat it enough that the whole concept of it is that the righteous saw the signs, they heeded the warnings, they heeded the commands of God and of Christ, and they survived through that judgment period. And just as in the days of Noah.
Yes.
Noah was well prepared. He was prepared enough that he survived that horrible storm for 50-something days, while other people died. All the air-breathing animals died. So, I mean, what else can you say?
I got one other thing to say.
What?
How could there be a transition in thought if he's still talking about the exact same thing he was talking about earlier in the chapter, before verse 36? Think about this. Verse 42, he says, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. That sounds awful familiar, doesn't it? Since this is the same thing that he said in verse 30. The sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will, listen to this, see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. So tell me, when did this thought transition? It didn't. It's the exact same thought. It's the same thing. He's elaborating more. He's using Hebrew parallelism or paralleling. He is making the same point over and over and over to drill it into their heads that this time's going to come. If you're faithful, you better be listening. You better be paying attention. That's the point that he's making. There's no transition verse here. It does not transition thought all the way from the end of chapter 23 right on through 26, right? Well, 25, all the way through the end of 25, yeah. So this discourse that he had is all one thought. And he's answering these questions, but there were only two questions. When are these things going to happen, and what's the sign of these things happening? When are these things going to take place? What do we look for? Which the Jews were very well noted for. They wanted a sign for everything, and the apostles were no different.
Yeah, one of the mistakes I think we make is that we think because I don't know, people get so offended when you say this, because we really truly don't study the Bible, I think, as God intended for us to study it. So, but I think, so people look at the Jews in the first century or in biblical times back then, and they think that they had no understanding whatsoever of the Old Testament. Like they were completely in the dark about what it said, and yet every day of their lives they were practicing these things.
That's right. And
so they knew. I mean, even a 12-year-old Jewish boy had to recite the Torah. And
yeah.
So today we look at, I don't know, I just don't think that we study the way that God had intended for us to study. And that's why we come up with so many divisions in thought and in the church.
That's true. Our study habits have been very lax. As a matter of fact, if I can speak firsthand because I'm a member of the Church of Christ. I love the Lord's church. I absolutely do. It is His eternal purpose, according to Ephesians 3, and it is beautiful. It's the way that He designed it. The only problem is we have messed things up. And so when I'm talking about the Church of Christ, I'm speaking from firsthand. For years, I quoted Revelation 2, verse 10 a lot. And then I would quote other passages. You know, I had the baptism passages down. But I got where I would just quote part of a verse, just like everybody else in the Church of Christ. And when I say everybody else, I mean that. We're not exegeting verses. We're using a part of one verse, and that's it. We've went from book, chapter, and verse to just part of a verse and give just as few syllables as possible, and I'll be happy with that answer. And that's just not right. That's not Bible study. Bible study takes time. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, "Be diligent to present yourself." Now, what is diligence? It's a whole lot more than we think study is. We think of study as, well, I gave. Here's what we believe study is. This one man said in our business meeting one time. He said, how many hours did he say he had put in? He said, I've studied this for 20 hours. Really? He'd studied eschatology for 20 hours and had all the answers? No.
Yeah, what he did was he went to Church of Christ websites and he looked at the arguments to try to refute preterism, and that's what he studied for 20 hours. He never looked at anything that we had to say. He automatically, and this is what happens in the church too, it's pretty rampant. And I don't think it's just Church of Christ, it's throughout the whole face of Christianity, that people just, their idea of studying is just reading something someone else wrote about it.
I've got to say this.
There was a comment on Facebook earlier today, a guy sends an article where they're about how preterism was refuted. It's like, show me from the Bible.
Okay, so you all pretty much know about a year ago, our congregation underwent this transformation from modern theology to first century Christianity. And it has been a tremendous blessing in ways I can't even begin to say. But early on,
the fact that we have the truth now.
Yeah, it is absolutely liberating. It brings a peace that truly passes understanding. But this is a kind of comical thing. You're going to know what I'm talking about as soon as I say it. Okay, so we had all these people at our congregation, and they were opposed to a couple of guys that had come in and so forth. So without going into all that, so they once we started talking about these things and considering and studying, I cannot tell you how many people came up to me, handed me papers to say, "Here, read this. This shows that this is wrong." And I promise you, if it was 10, it was 100 that handed me the exact same thing. They got on the internet and they typed in 80-70 doctrine false or something like that, and guess what comes up? Church of Christ. And guess what comes up? La Vista Church of Christ. I'm telling you what. So
that's been rebuked and refuted in so many ways.
Oh, it's
I'm trying to keep it up on the internet.
Yeah, me too. And it's the absolute weakest arguments that exist.
Out lies in it, a misrepresentation of Scripture, quoting things that are saying that things are said in one thing, and then you go back and research it, and they're not even in the same chapter.
The whole premise of their work was to scare people by lying to them so that they could keep their members, not examine the truth.
Yeah, first they had to put a name on it.
Yeah. So anyway,
so they can villainize it.
I thought you might enjoy that.
Well, you know, when I was attending this one congregation with a minister, when I told him what I believed, and I talked to him for like 2-3 hours, and I asked him questions he couldn't answer. He said, "Well, we don't really know what they taught." I'm like, please, it's right here. It's written down for us what they taught. Don't you see that?
It's right there.
So then he goes and he preaches that next Sunday, and he pulled everything off the internet. He admitted it to me privately that he did. And I think he even said it publicly there that he didn't know much about it, that he pulled this from the internet. And so he gave no thought about what I said. He was just going to prove me wrong.
I'll say this also. Same scenario. Again, this is early on, and was this earlier at the first of the year, something like that? There was a local congregation. Do we dare call them out? They had one of their members had put on Facebook that their preacher was going to be preaching on the 80-70 doctrine. Well, I heard about that because I was very close to this man, actually. And
in distance.
and he so anyway, I wanted to go and listen to it. So I told the congregation that's what I was going to do, and see if I could get someone to fill in for me. Well, our entire congregation said, if you're going, we're going. So we all on Sunday morning went and listened to this guy preach. And he truly had no knowledge whatsoever. As a matter of fact, not only did he not know what first century Christianity truth was, he didn't even know what he believed, and admitted as much that he got this information off of the internet. He preached his sermon from information off of the internet. He got his sermon off the internet. That's the
defense.
So many other.
So when you call them on it, then they go to mark you, and then they gather all the men or the leadership together, and they withdraw from you because they can't sit down and study with you.
Yeah, they have no idea what they're talking about, and that's sad. It's sad when they don't know. Here's the way.
Of course, they don't tell these men when they're in the meeting that you begged them to study with you. You show them some stuff they couldn't answer.
Right.
No, they never say that.
No, they're never going to say that. So anyway, we had to study with him later on. Him and his wife and a couple members of the church were there. And then 3 of us from our congregation, and there was relations involved. That's why there were so many. He had no answers. He didn't even know what he believed, and could not back up his own beliefs. So here's the way I view this: if you know the truth, and I had a beloved gospel preacher that was teaching me and mentoring me early on when I was young, and he gave me some advice. When I was worried about the Pentecostals and the Baptists assaulting me and gunning for me, you know what? They never cared about me. But he did make a point. He said, you don't have to really worry about anyone in denominations. It's the brethren that are going to get you every time. And that's what his quote was. But he said, John, all you have to do is know the truth. If you know the truth, then you can refute error. You can see it wherever it's at. So when these preachers come to me and say, well, how about you send me something that tells me what you believe? You know what? No. All you got to do is read the Bible. And if you know what the scriptures teach and you know the truth, and you should be able to tell me where I'm wrong, period. If you haven't done it, then you're just as guilty as I was before I started studying and actually preaching. You better get your nose in the book just like I had to. Not that I have all the answers, and if you can show me that I'm wrong, I'm open to that. But this New Testament truth is going to prevail for all of time, and either we agree with it or we disagree with it. Okay, so we're getting close to being done. So no transition verse back to Matthew 24. No transition verse there. It's all the same thought.
Yeah, if Matthew 24:36 is a transition verse, and Matthew 24:37 is a transition right back to it, which it's not. Neither is a transitional verse.
Yeah,
these are conjunctions. It said some other things, use other words in it, but most of the modern Bibles are kind of an offshoot from the King James. They kind of borrowed some of their theology, and there's some errors in it in every one of these versions of the Bible.
Yeah, and we like I said, we have to be diligent about our study, and that means digging. You're going to spend some time. That means you're not watching The Voice or American Idol or I don't know, whatever it is anymore. That means you're going to have to DVR it and watch it later and put some time in. That means, it means if you want to know the truth, you're going to have to work at it, and it's not easy, and it takes sacrifice if you want to know it.
Yeah, here's the thing.
I got a question I want to ask about this transition before we.
Okay, I'll just say this very quickly then. The Jews, if you go back and you read the Old Testament, you see how much a part of their lives the law of Moses was, and the things that they did on a daily things that they did daily and weekly. They were deeply entrenched and involved in this. Yeah, and they knew these passages in the Old Testament, or what we call the Old Testament. Today, the Bible is not an intricate part of our lives. It's a book that we pick up so many hours a week and we read, almost like religion.
Well, you're being generous. Hours a week?
Well, I'm trying, but
so many people, the only time they open their Bibles is Sunday morning and Wednesday night.
So
maybe Sunday night.
What I've noticed when you see some of the comments, said out of ignorance.
Yeah.
It's because the Bible is not part of their daily lives. They're not enmeshed, and they're not fully into the Lord like they probably should be.
Right.
I'm guilty of it too, to a certain extent. So I'm just not pointing fingers at other people. I'm pointing back to me. But
Right.
the whole thing is, if we made this Bible, God's word, a part of our lives, like the Jews made their law, we probably be as messed up today.
Maybe, yeah.
But I think that, honestly, I think that we would see these things more often.
But yeah, the more truth you put in your old noggin here, the more it comes out in everything that you do. Okay, so we get lots of preachers watching, and that's great. Thank you for doing that, because that shows that you do have an interest in either learning how to refute us or having an open heart and learning the truth. I hope it's the latter of the two. So I'm going to ask anyone watching, I'm going to ask you this question. It's generally accepted, this is more slanted towards those in the Church of Christ, that we're familiar with. It's generally accepted that the Olivet Discourse up through verse 34 is talking about, at least now it is accepted, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And, okay, rightly so, because it is. But then they say in verse 36, it transitions to a new thought about the end of the world. So let me ask you this question. If it transitions in verse 36, where does that leave verse 34? I'm sorry, verse 35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. That puts that verse in limbo. How do you explain that one? Well, maybe verse 35 is okay, verse 34 and 35 go together. All these things are going to take place in this generation. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Where does he transition? Well, that's a little difficult to answer, isn't it? Because there's no transition. Judgment, here's the problem. And I know we're over just a little bit, but here's the problem. Tell me if I'm way off on this, Trent, because I trust you. The problem as I see it is we were taught that judgment is this earth destruction, burning scenario. And that's what judgment is. The fact of the matter is that exact same judgment language that was used by Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Amos and Joel in the Old Testament to describe judgment in the Old Testament is used in the New Testament. Now, why would they change to a different thought? That was their language. That's how they spoke.
They don't.
So go back and read those passages I mentioned earlier about the Lord coming in judgment, and see that that's judgment against Israel. It's judgment against Edom. It's just judgment against Babylon. You name it. It's judgment. And it all sounds like the world's going to be burned. Every one of them.
One thing I don't understand, because we put this offer out there to the folks out here.
Right.
These end-time prophecy guys, for lack of a better term, on TV, they make millions of dollars a year preaching an end-of-the-world scenario, end-of-planet Earth scenario, and people are so willing to give their money, and you and I are offering the truth, which we can't find where it says that the Earth is going to end. So I'm going to ask again, you futurists out there who are so dead set on this Earth being destroyed, and that this is the last days, and it's going to happen anytime. Look, my 401k is not what I want it to be. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not where I want it to be. I thought I'd have much more money here than I do now. And as a matter of fact, my bank account is not like I want it to be either. I like buying cars, That'd
be all right.
So you futurists out there, put your money where your mouth is. If this is the end days right here, and it can happen any moment, please put my name upon your beneficiary, so when you die, I can have your bank accounts. I don't want your bills. I just want your bank accounts. Like I said, my 401k is not what it should be. I'm ashamed of it.
Gotcha.
And embarrassed. But I want your money.
Yeah.
Will you give me your money? Because you're apt to give it to these false teachers on TV.
Help Trent out, will you?
Help me out. Help the poor. Help the orphan boy out.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have to close this down. It's been great, man. Oh man, lots of great comments. But Now, just about 15, 20 minutes ago, we were giving a plug to a young man that I want to plug again. Okay, get ready. Write this name down. You need to go to his page, send him a friend request. You're going to love this guy. I'm telling you, you're going to love him. Kenneth Rooster Morgan. I'm telling you what, and during the Restoration movement, we had, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, whatever that was, we had Raccoon John Smith. Well, the modern Restoration movement that's taking place, Restoration Movement 2.0, we've got Kenneth Rooster Morgan. I love it. Although I don't know if he's going to be carrying anybody off and throwing them into a river and baptizing them like Raccoon John Smith did. But anyway, do that.
He'll probably take you hunting.
You won't regret it. You just simply won't regret it. Just ask him, inundate him with questions, keep him busy. Maybe that'll give me a little relief this week. Nah, that's okay. Just send your questions. Okay, certainly love everyone who has watched, and we're thankful that you have, and we want you to be back with us next week. Tell everybody, send this off. Get on my page and look up the 2 sermons from Sunday night. Last Sunday night and the previous Sunday night. They're both entitled, Why I Believe Jesus Returned in 70 AD, I think. The first one is Jesus Said So. The second one is The Apostles Said So. And the third one will be this Sunday night again, so watch for that around 5:15 or so. It'll be live on Facebook. So watch for that and share those and send those to other people and let them see these. It's just basic information. It's not real complicated, and I'm trying to keep from going real fast. I get excited and sometimes I go faster with it, but I'm trying to keep from doing that and just keeping it level. So be back with us next week. Anything else?
No, that's it. I think we offended enough people today.
and encouraged plenty too.
We encouraged everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm sure we offended people. I can tell by some of the comments.
Oh, well, it's going to happen. The truth does offend people, but we're going to defend our Savior nonetheless. So having said that, we'll leave you with what we always say. Come visit us for 2675 Kentucky Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, the Westside Church of Christ. And westsidecoc.org. You can see pretty much all these videos on there. And also, outside of that,
study to show yourself approved.
Study to show yourself approved.
Nice approved.
Okay. All right. Next week, same time. See you then.